gloom, despair, and agony on me. Deep, dark depression, excessive misery. If it weren't for bad luck, I'd have no luck at all. Gloom, despair, and agony on me. Now, some of you look at me like, I've never heard that song. Some of you heard it every Saturday night. For years, two guys standing back to back, starting to sing it in the cornfield. Job, and I thought of something, Joe, when you led that song, because that's why we want to be true. We want the chorus to be true because we want to say we'll understand it better by and by. Job doesn't teach that necessarily. And that's one of the things we're going to discover as we kind of journey here. And as I take you walk through, there's no way to cover the book extensively. So it's going to be a quick overview. 4 things I want to suggest to you up front by way of introduction. Number 1, we find the patience of Job. And that's something to me that's always been really interesting. When you read over in James chapter 5, verse 11, you know therefore now the patience of Job. And I want to go, there's been the time in my life when I go, James, have you read the book? Have you listened to what he said and how he acted? But there's a phrase that continues to be repeated through the book of Job. In all this, Job did not sin. I think we need to hear that. See, the wonderful thought of this story with God, God's okay with our frustration. In fact, He's okay if we verbalize it. We're going to get ready to, in one story, look through I thought of several different ways. There are a lot of these lessons I've kind of looked at. How in the Word am I going to, and I'm thinking about Psalms. How do you move through Psalms in a way that does it any kind of justice in the story of God with David? And that's a whole other discussion. Well, Job's very similar, but there's something in the story of Job. As you've got it in the backdrop of a time when there's most likely silence of the text, you've got Job here, this wonderful historical event that God shares of an individual. Flip over to Job chapter 1. And verse number 1. And we're just going to we're not going to read the entirety of this, but I want you to see, and once again here's how Job is introduced to us. There was a man in the land of Uz, whose name was Job. And that man was blameless and upright, and one who feared God and shunned evil. Now, there's something interesting said about him. In your Bible, there's probably a note over in Ezekiel and also in Job. He's one of the individuals included in the list. If there were, there's a wicked city, if these 3 individuals lived in that city, they'd be the only ones saved. So there's something. Job falls into the category of Daniel, falls into the category of Elijah, Elisha especially, of individuals who had such a relationship with God and a dedication to God that they were singled out. And 7 sons and 3 daughters were born to him. 10 children. Now, the patience of Job. I mentioned that. That could have been one of the contributing factors. What he did for them is one of the things, verse 5, because there's no way to read all of this, but I want you to read it. Because of those 10 children, so it was when the days of feasting had run their course, that Job had sinned and sanctified them. He would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, it may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. Thus Job did regularly. Now you find out just early on about Job, he is a man who loves God and he loves his family. I mean, You get those two things right in your life, you can consider yourself a fairly successful individual. But he's patient, man. Number two, we find out the proper distinction between deity and flesh. One of the overwhelming things you're going to see about what we read in Job is God is God. And Job gets that. Man, we live in a world that doesn't get that.
That's right.
We live in a world that says, oh, God. A lot of people say, really? Others go, hey, he's just another deity. Job said, there is a God, the God, one God. I'm going to follow him regardless. Remember, whatever happens, I'm going to stay faithful to him. Now, the intensity of Job's losses, we don't have, I look in this audience, within a span of a chapter 1, he loses everything. Family, cattle fields, sheep, sitting in a ash pile. Thirdly, the Bible's concept of perfection. This didn't dawn on me. I kind of went back and looked through the book. There's only a couple of times when he is. Now, the patience of Job is a really interesting, but the perfection of Job. And some of you are going to go, did you read the book? Because it does ask a lot of questions. And he makes a lot of observations. And when you get over to 42, he realizes said too much. And we'll eventually get there. But one of the things that he's referred to as an individual who before God is perfect. We're challenged to that. We'll look at that in just a moment. And then fourthly, I went the wrong way. Fourthly, we learn on one of Satan's, it's supposed to be one of Satan's most effective weapons. He's used it since the beginning of time, and he continues to use it, and he's alive and well today. And so that's kind of the introductory thought. We're going to move into this now. Number one, patience. When you think of Job, he endured the difficulty because he knew that his Redeemer lives. Look at Job 19. We're going to look at a couple of passages, but in Job 19, we're pretty much going to stay in the context of Job, move once or twice outside of it. But Job 19, verse 25. Now, Job does something, in fact, there are parallels between Job and Jesus and his faithfulness in the middle of whatever he had to endure, and his dedication to God no matter what happened. And in Job 19, verse 25, for I know that my Redeemer lives, and he shall stand at last on the earth. And after my skin is discorded, this I know, that in my flesh I shall see God. That verse also triggered in my mind the thought that John shares later, that verse of, we know when he appears, we don't know what he'll be like, but we know we'll be like him. And Job said, I'm going to live my life based on the concept of I'm going to see God, and whatever happens between here and that moment is okay. I'm not going to rejoice in it. I'll struggle through it. I'll wrestle through it. I'll deal with it. But in his patience, remember, I remind you of a phrase, was in all these things, Job did not see him. What does that mean? Well, not only is he patient, he knows his place. Man must understand his place in the scheme of things. We were talking in class this morning, and they reminded me of something I thought about earlier, and that is, we live in a world where man thinks he's the center of stuff. It's all about me. It's all about what's happening in my world, in my scheme of things, in my situation. Job realized it's not all about me. Go back to Job chapter 2, verse 1. As you're turning there, this is after Job gets all the bad news. And his statement, if I came here naked, I'm going to leave here naked. Blessed be the name of the Lord. How, you don't see that on too many bumper stickers. But Job is kind of given a philosophy or a thought process of saying, I came here with nothing. I'm going to leave here with nothing, in that sense of having any kind of possession. We're going to talk about that in a minute, because that's one of the things where Satan will have his best and most successful efforts. And that's either, and I'm going to tell you, I'm going to give you a little precursor to it. He'll either give you too much stuff or not enough stuff, so you spend your life trying to figure out which one you want. And in this moment with Job, it's interesting. We're going to look at a couple of them. Job 38, verse 2, and then 40 and verse 14. Just a couple of observations that Job makes. 38 and verse 2. And this is, of course, Job speaking, or God speaking to Job. Who is this who darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Now prepare yourself like a man. I will question you, and you will answer me. See, that's that moment where all the questions Job asks, all the moments where he's trying to, none of this makes sense. He lived in a world and a time, most likely, and you'll hear this discussion, if something bad happens to someone, well, maybe, and of course, remember all the wonderful friends. I wish we had time to talk about them, but we don't. All the wonderful counseling. Well, just go ahead, fess up to what you did that got you in this predicament. God will forgive you, and you can move forward. And Job legitimately said, in so many words, I've done nothing to deserve this. Doesn't it kind of remind you of that moment? John 8, when the disciples and the blind man came to Jesus. You remember the question that the disciples asked him about the blind man? Who sinned? This man's parents or this man? Now Jesus wasn't saying none of them sinned. He said that has nothing to do with the blindness. What Job tells us more than anything else is suffering in this world has nothing in its essence to do with whether we're doing what God wants us to do or not. Because we live in an imperfect world where struggling is real. That's what Romans 8 shares. Well, look at 40:14 before we leave here to go over to Romans 8. We'd make a little veer over, but the Lord answers Job, and verse 14 says, "Then I will confess to you that your own right hand can save you." Why would God say that? He's giving him that thought process of you can't fix this on your own. Because he then mentions, look now at the behemoth which I made along with you. He eats grass like an ox. See now his strength is in his hips and his power is in his stomach muscles. He moves his tail like a cedar. The sinews of his thighs are tightly knit. His bones are like beams of bronze. His ribs like bars of iron. He is the first of the ways of God. Only he who made him and can bring him near the sword. Surely the mountains yield food for him, and all the beasts of the field play there. He lies under the lotus trees in the covert of reeds and marsh. The lotus trees cover him with their shade. The willows by the brook surround him. Indeed, the river may rage, yet he is not disturbed. He's confident through the Jordan gushes into his mouth. Though he takes it in his eyes, or one pierces his nose with a snare. Now, what you don't get in that comparison is said, Job, you're kind of like that ox. I'm going to take care of things. I'm going to provide for you. But But you've got to know that all that provision, all that care, the shade, the support, everything that's yours. Jesus sums that up in Matthew when he says, seek first the kingdom of God is righteous, all these things shall be added to you. I'm going to take care if you'll trust what I'm going to do for you. Romans 8:5-8 is where Paul shares what happens when we don't think according to the Spirit instead of the flesh. For those who live according to the flesh set their minds on the things of the flesh, but those who live according to the Spirit, the things of the Spirit. For to be carnally minded is death, but to be spiritually minded is life and peace. Because the carnal mind is enmity against God, for it is not subject to the law of God, nor indeed can be. So then those who are in the flesh cannot please God. Now, one of the things you find out real quickly about Job is he's not a fleshly individual. And he's willing to submit his patience. He knows his place. Biblical perfection. What's it mean? I think one of the things we struggle with and wrestle with, Matthew 5 talks about, and there are other passages, but this one came to my mind when I was thinking about it. Be therefore perfect as your Father is perfect. Anybody in here feel like you can do that? Oh, I was just hoping one person would raise their hand. See, Job would have raised his hand. Not in the sense of absolute perfection, but in the sense, look at a couple of passages with me. Look at Job 1, verse 1. I want you to see some words that are used in reference to Job. Now, I remember when we talk about his patience, remember understanding his place. Here, as far as his perfection, Job 1:1, I already read this once, but it says, Job and that man was blameless. I asked I don't know if I'd be described as blameless. Don't know if you'd put yourself in that category. We'll look down at verse 8. I think it's verse 8. Yeah. The Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? Every time I hear that, I just want to veer off into my own rendition of, I know this same scenario. This is not a punctiliar moment in time that happened once. This is a regular day in the life of God and Satan. Where the Ephesians 6 context kind of plays in. We don't wrestle against flesh and blood. We wrestle against spiritual powers in heavenly places and realms. And this battle of the forces that we can't see, that unseen world, where God and Satan are doing that. There's so many episodes of this. You think about them vying over the body of Moses, and there's so many, Jude talks about that, where there's this discussion going on. That one's mine. No, I want that one. No, you can't have that one. I'm going to protect this one. And I always mean that. Have you considered my servant Job? There is none like him in the earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil. How about that as an endorsement from God? It doesn't mean that he is constantly every day without sin. It means his attitude, his intentionality is, because if I remind you down early, he's offering burnt offerings all the time for his own sin and for the sins of his family, knowing I'm not perfect, but I want to be blameless. I want to be living my life in such a way that at any moment in time I can stand before God and say, I'm doing my best. That is biblical perfection. That's 1 John 1:7. If we walk in the light as he is in the light, what happens? The blood of Christ continues to cleanse us. It doesn't mean on our own. It means because of God's relationship with us through his Son. It means for God's desire. Look at chapter 2, verse 3. A similar statement is made. This is once again God talking to Satan about Job. Have you considered my servant Job? There is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil. And he adds an addendum. And still he holds fast to his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him without cause. Because that's after that little discussion, when God first introduced him, said, have you considered Job? Well, the only reason he's following you is because he's got all your stuff. Take his stuff away from him. He'll turn on you. God says, and see, here's where the song we sang just before to me gets a little cloudy. Because we want to understand it better by it. We want to figure this out. We want to know why in the world does this happen. And see, in the middle of all this, there's a person that doesn't know this conversation's going on, and his name is Job. He has no idea that the God of heaven and Satan are having a daily discussion about him. I'm going to ask you a question. Do you want to be a part of that discussion? See, in years past, many times I've looked through Job, and Caleb and I kind of walked through Job several years ago. We had some time as we sat and talked and prayed. And there were times prior to that experience that I said, I don't want my name brought up. And then I thought the absurdity of that. There would be no greater honor. Now, I've been privileged in my life to know a lot of folks and be loved by a lot of special individuals. And my name has come from the lips of folks that I love very dearly, and my name has come from the lips of those that maybe don't feel the same way about me. And there's a variety of responses to that. But when you hear your name come from the lips of God, and his observation about you, he's mine, and I know it. See, but Job didn't know that. 13 of Job, listen to this, beginning of verse 23. And this is Job. How many are my iniquities and sins? Make me know my transgressions and my sin. Why do you hide your face and regard me as your enemy? Will you frighten a leaf driven to and fro, and will you pursue dry stubble? For you write bitter things against me and make me inherit the iniquities of my youth. You put my feet in the stocks and watch closely all my paths. You set a limit for the soles of my feet. Man decays like a rotten thing, like a garment that is moth-eaten. Here's an individual that to his friends said, I haven't done anything to deserve this, but I realize who I am. And the observation, and this is the thought I want to bring with this. Biblical perfection is this. It is found in a life of humility and in effort, the pursuit of forgiveness. If I live my life pursuing my place, and the pursuit of forgiveness with God, that doesn't mean that I beat myself up all the time. That doesn't mean that I come before God constantly going, oh, I'm such a bad individual. What it means, though, is I realize without you, I am nobody. But with you, I'm forgiven. And that is biblical perfection. See, something else you learn in the book of Job. Satan is alive and well. 1 Peter 3, you know that text. Like a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour. See, what happens in Job 1 and 2, especially in 2 and 3, is currents. Satan is constantly seeking. He's going into the presence of God in this meeting area, and he's identifying individuals that he's trying to access. Job 1:7 is one of those moments where you kind of remind the Lord said to Satan, "From where do you come?" So Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth and from walking back and forth on it." I wonder, has there been any time in the last let's just go days. I might even just say hours, but I'll go days when you've sensed he's been nearby? When you realize what I'm thinking about or what I want or what situation is about to occur, this is not from God, this is from Satan. This is one of his attempts to get me out of what I need to be doing or away from where I should be. And Satan is the one who tempts us, not God. Anytime we want something we are not supposed to have, that is Satan walking in our world again today. And Job gives us a vivid image of him. He'll use any means available to try to destroy us. And see, here's the thing about Satan that we need to understand. And this is the part of the whole spiritual forces in the unseen world that I just can't kind of get my brain around. Satan knows us. And he knows our weaknesses. But let me tell you something. There are many times he thinks, because God knows us better. And that's what happens in the story with Job. Because Satan thinks he's going, well, I know why he's still following you. Take that away and do that to him. Hurt. Let me at his body. Disease. Go past catastrophic loss. You take your health away and see what happens. God says, you can't kill him. Wealth and responsibility. Something I think that sometimes we miss in this, with Job, realizing his place, his perfect, the peace and the perfection that he kind of works through. You look at Job and you go, my word, he was a rich man. And when you look at the 10 children, the houses, the cattle, the sheep, the possessions that he had, phenomenally rich. The problem with stuff is that it can get in the way of our relationship with God. Look at Job 31. This is Job. There's several different locations where he kind of has this discussion. But in Job 31, it's one of those moments where he's kind of trying to say, hey, if stuff is what's gotten me in this predicament, here's his feeling. Verse 24, I believe, here. If I have made gold my hope, or said to find gold, you are my confidence. If I have rejoiced because my wealth was great and because my hand had gained much, if I have observed the sun when it shines, or the moon moving in brightness, so that my heart has been secretly enticed, and my mouth, listen to this, has kissed my hand, this also would be an iniquity deserving of judgment, for I would have denied God who is above. See, Job is one of those, no matter how much he had, realized he didn't have that except by God's provision. Job said, I'm not going, I got all this myself. Remember the first words he said. The Lord gives. The Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. There's so many passages through Job where he makes this observation in reference to the righteous, the unrighteous. And we were talking about this the other day somewhere. I'm trying to remember. It may have been in class. We're talking about, I think it was last Wednesday night. We're talking about the fact where God sends the rain on the just and the unjust way. What happens also in the world? The difficulty comes on the just and the unjust. There's no partiality with God. Now we intervene and pray, and there is a God who is merciful and gracious, and He knows our limit. And if you'll note throughout the story of Job, there's one person that has the final word every time, and it's God. And Job's final word in this whole process, why do people suffer? Well, there's no answer. That's when you read through Job, you're hoping somewhere in the middle of this, for that moment where and again, some people would, whoa, no. The answer is at the end where Job gets all of his. Job's lost 10 children. There's no indicator at the end of this story that those are the 10 that are restored. He has other children. Look at Job 6:10. A couple of passages here. Then I would still have comfort. Though in anguish I would exult, He will not spare, for I have not concealed the words of the Holy One. Look over at verse 24. Teach me, and I will hold my tongue. Cause me to understand wherein I have erred. Look at chapter 7 and verse 20. Point blank question he asked God, have I sinned? What have I done to you, O watcher of men? Why have you set me as your target so that I am a burden to myself? Look at 24 verse 1. This is just, there are so many moments where Job, since times are not hidden from the Almighty, why do those who know Him see not His days? And Job's going to say over and over again throughout this whole process, I don't understand this at all. But his lack of understanding, it does not interrupt his trust and faith in God. Some people have asked me, when I get frustrated in a situation, or, the righteous and the wicked suffer. Job 2:10, 5, 7, 21, 25 through 26. Job says, it's not just me. Now, he'll acknowledge in all of this, if there's something I've done that I'm unaware of, you let me know. But right now, I want to make sure I understand that he's trying, as we all do, and it is our very human nature to go, I want, if you can just tell me why all this is happening, it'll make more sense. I challenge you. Read the book. Come back to me when you find the place where Job ever gets any indicator of, here's why. He doesn't. Three quick thoughts. One, God is in control. Job never ceases to verify that. Even in the moments when he questions, even in the moments when he's trying to say, I don't know why, I am miserable, I don't understand any of this, I am in anguish, and I am, in the moments where he's in his sackcloth and ashes, and he's penitent, and he's trying to do everything within his power to show God, I am still yours. Because there's nobody else I trust. God will limit Satan. Praise God. Now, I cannot promise you, and this is the thing about Job that's really can be an anxiety producer. I can't promise you that God won't let Satan loose on you. But I can promise you that because of the powerful story of Job, if you have confidence in God and trust Him, He will not let Satan destroy you. I remember a discussion many years ago I had with a dear, dear friend of mine by the name of Mabel Behringer. I can't talk about Job. I've been here long enough, and God has both blessed and burdened me in seeing individuals go through a lot of things. But in my lifetime of ministry, I don't know that I've known anyone who had more reason to just tell God, I am done. But I've also not known a more stubborn individual. Y'all know it. Some of you know exactly what I'm talking about. I remember at least one of the first times she walked into the office. I think it was one of those times she'd gone over and she and Harry Harry's Alzheimer's had kind of gotten worse and worse. And she walked in and she said before we ever started, she said, you mention Romans 8:28 to me, I'll slap you. Because that was our standard little joke back and forth. All things work together for good for those that love the Lord and are called according to His purpose. Because Mabel wanted to know why. Why? What have I done? Mabel, it's not about what you've done or haven't done. It's that God knows you better than you know yourself. And He might take you to the edge. But know this, He'll grab you just before you go over. Ask Peter, Lord, save me. Get in the boat. I got you. That's what the end of this book is about. God rewards faithfulness. That's where there's an I don't believe, now you can argue with me and we can look back and analyze this biblically. I don't believe Job got back. The text kind of gives the indication in the sense of stuff and children. There may have been a bigger blessing. Who knows? But he rewarded faithfulness in such a powerful way. So that's why in the story of God and His story as we've moved through, Job is in the middle of this, and in what he says, no matter what happens, God is going to always deliver. I know some of you are going, wait a minute. One of the final thoughts of each one of these lessons through the one story is that God's there and He cares. It's amazing that every book of the Bible has that in it. A consistent promise that God will deliver. I hope tonight, and you may know someone that needs to know no matter what happens, God is God. And if we keep him where he's supposed to be, he'll take care of us. And the eventual outcome will be faithfulness rewarded. Enter in, good and faithful servant. Well done is the words he'll use. If we can assist anyone tonight in any way, there's a need that you have that needs to be expressed to our elders. They're available for that as we stand and as we sing.